Divine lay on a thin mat, her chest rising and falling with each painful breath, weaker than the last. Faith held her tightly, shaking, her eyes full of fear and helplessness. Outside, just a few steps away, the neighbours were sitting under a tree, laughing and playing draughts, pretending not to see her desperation. She ran to them, fell to her knees, and begged for help, but they only looked away. One by one, they stood up, went inside, and closed their doors. They did not just refuse her, they abandoned her. Faith turned back to Divine, her voice cracking as she screamed, "Neighbours, please help me!" But no one answered. This was her life, watching the people who should have helped turn their backs when she needed them most. What would happen to Divine if Faith could not find a way to save her? Sit back as we dive into this shocking story. 3 weeks earlier, Faith had noticed the first signs. Divine had come home from school complaining of a headache, her usually bright eyes dulled with fatigue. Faith had dismissed it as exhaustion from studying too hard. Divine was always the serious one, the young woman who carried books everywhere and dreamed of becoming a doctor. At 20 years old, she had a maturity that sometimes startled Faith, a quiet wisdom that seemed beyond her years. "Mama, I'm fine," Divine had insisted, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired." But the headaches persisted. Then came the fever, creeping in during the night and leaving Divine drenched in sweat by morning. Faith watched helplessly as her daughter's appetite disappeared, her energy drained away, and her laughter, that beautiful sound that had once filled their small, mud-walled house, grew silent. Faith had been alone since her husband, Emmanuel, had left 2 years ago. He'd promised to send money from the city, promised to come back for them once he'd found steady work. The promises had faded like morning mist. No letters came, no money, just silence. Faith had learned to carry the weight of their small world on her shoulders, working in other people's farms during planting season, washing clothes by the river, selling vegetables at the market on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Every coin she earned went toward food, Divine's school fees, and keeping their small home from falling apart. Now, as Divine's illness worsened, Faith felt that weight crushing her. She'd gone to Peter first. He lived 3 houses down, a man who'd once borrowed her cooking pots when his wife had visitors. Faith had stood at his door, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. "Peter, please. Divine is very sick. I need to take her to the clinic in town, but I don't have money for transport. Could you—" "Faith, you know times are hard," Peter had interrupted, not meeting her eyes. His gaze drifted over her shoulder toward the road. "I have my own family to think about. Maybe ask someone else." The door had closed before she could respond. Ruth had been worse. Faith's neighbour to the left, Ruth was known for her sharp tongue and her encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's business. When Faith approached her yard, Ruth was hanging laundry, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Ruth, I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard about Divine," Ruth cut in, pins clenched between her teeth. "Sad business, that. But Faith, you should have thought about these things before your husband left. A woman alone with a child? It's asking for trouble." Faith's hands trembled. "She needs a doctor. I just need—" "What you need is to learn to stand on your own 2 feet," Ruth said, her tone matter-of-fact. "I have my own problems. Go ask the church. That's what they're there for. One by one, Faith went from door to door. Some people were kinder in their refusals, their voices soft with pity. Others were blunt, their reasons ranging from genuine poverty to simple unwillingness to get involved. By the time the sun began to set, Faith had collected nothing but humiliation and a growing sense of despair. That night, Divine's fever spiked. Faith spent hours pressing cool cloths to her daughter's burning forehead, whispering prayers into the darkness. Divine's small hand clutched hers, her breath coming in short, laboured gasps. "Mama," Divine whispered, her voice barely audible. "Am I going to die?" The question shattered something inside Faith. She pulled her daughter close, feeling the heat radiating from her frail body. "No, my love, no! I won't let that happen! I promise you!" But how could she keep that promise? The next morning, Faith walked to the village centre before dawn. She'd heard that Mr. Thomas, the village elder, sometimes helped families in crisis. He was a stern man with silver hair and a commanding presence, someone people respected and feared in equal measure. If anyone could mobilize the community, it would be him. She found him outside his compound, supervising workers who were repairing his fence. "Mr. Thomas," Faith called, approaching carefully. "Please, sir, I need your help." He turned, his weathered face unreadable. "Faith, what brings you here so early?" She explained Divine's condition, her voice cracking as she described her daughter's suffering. Mr. Thomas listened, his expression unchanging. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Faith, I sympathize with your situation," he said finally, "but I cannot force people to help you. Everyone has their own burdens. If your neighbours have refused, perhaps you should consider why. Have you paid back the money you borrowed from the women's group last year?" Faith felt her face flush. She had borrowed money for Divine's school fees and had been paying it back slowly, a little each month, but she was behind. "I'm working on it, sir. But my daughter..." "Your financial irresponsibility is not the village's problem, mister," Thomas said, his tone dismissive. "Sort out your debts first. Then perhaps people will be more willing to trust you." He turned back to his workers, effectively ending the conversation. Faith stood there, humiliated, anger and desperation warring inside her. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand that her daughter's life was worth more than unpaid debts. But she knew it would be useless. She walked home in a daze, her mind racing. What could she do? Where could she turn? The answer came from an unexpected source. Amelia appeared at Faith's door that afternoon like an answer to an unspoken prayer. They had been friends as children, playing together in the village stream, sharing secrets under the mango trees. But life had pulled them in different directions. Amelia had married and moved to a neighbouring village, and their friendship had faded into occasional greetings at the market. "Faith?" Amelia said, her eyes wide with concern. "I heard about Divine. How is she?" Faith's composure crumbled. She hadn't realised how desperately she needed someone to simply care. The tears came in a flood, and Amelia held her, letting her sob against her shoulder. "She's getting worse," Faith choked out. "And no one will help me. No one." Amelia pulled back, her hands firm on Faith's shoulders. "Show me." Inside, Divine lay on the mat, her skin pale and clammy. Amelia knelt beside her, pressing a hand to the girl's forehead. Her expression darkened. "This is serious, Faith. She needs proper medical care immediately." "I know," Faith whispered. "But I have no money, no transport." "I have a little saved," Amelia interrupted. "Not much, but enough for transport and maybe initial consultation. But we need to go now, today." Hope surged through Faith, so intense it was almost painful. "Amelia, I can't ask you to—" "You didn't ask. I'm offering." Amelia's voice was firm. "Get her ready. I'll arrange for transport." But as Faith began gathering Divine's things, wrapping her in a worn shawl, a new complication arose. Irene, Faith's cousin, appeared at the door. Irene had always been judgmental. Her visits usually preceded by some moral lecture or another. Today was no different. "Faith, I heard you're planning to take Divine to town," Irene said, her voice dripping with concern that sounded anything but genuine. "People are talking. Let them talk," Faith said, not looking up from Divine. "They're saying you're being irresponsible, that you should have taken her to the local herbalist first, that you're wasting money you don't have on fancy doctors when traditional medicine works just fine." Faith's hands stilled. She turned to face Irene, her patience finally snapping. "My daughter is dying, Irene. I don't care what people say." "But they're also saying—" Irene hesitated, glancing at Amelia. "They're saying maybe this illness is punishment for your husband leaving, for your pride in refusing to remarry." The words hung in the air like poison. Faith felt Amelia stiffen beside her. "Get out," Faith said quietly. "I'm just telling you what." "Get out of my house!" Faith's voice rose to a shout. "If you're not here to help, then leave." Irene's face flushed with indignation, but she left, slamming the door behind her. In the silence that followed, Faith realized her hands were shaking with rage. "Don't listen to her," Amelia said gently. "She's always been like this, spreading poison wherever she goes." But the damage was done. Faith knew that by nightfall, everyone in the village would hear Irene's version of events. The whispers would multiply, the judgment would deepen. But she couldn't think about that now. Divine was all that mattered. The journey to town was agonizing. Amelia had arranged for a motorcycle taxi, and Faith held Divine in her arms as they bumped along the rough road. Every jolt seemed to cause her daughter pain, and Faith whispered constant reassurances, promising her that everything would be all right. At the clinic, a tired-looking nurse examined Divine while Faith and Amelia waited in a cramped hallway that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Other families sat on benches, their own worries etched on their faces. Faith clutched Amelia's hand, praying silently. When the doctor finally called them in, his expression was grave. "Your daughter has severe malaria," he said, showing them test results Faith couldn't understand. "It's advanced. She needs to be admitted immediately for intensive treatment." Without it. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I cannot guarantee her recovery if you take her home." "How much?" Faith asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The number he quoted might as well have been $1 million. It was more than Faith earned in 6 months, more than Amelia had, more than seemed possible. "There must be something," Amelia said desperately. "A payment plan? Charity care? The doctor shook his head. The hospital requires a deposit before admission. I'm sorry. They left with a prescription for medications that Faith also couldn't afford, instructions to return immediately if Divine's condition worsened, and a crushing sense of helplessness. On the ride back, Divine was barely conscious, her head lolling against Faith's chest. Faith stared at the passing landscape, the familiar fields, the scattered homesteads, the unchanging rhythm of rural life, and felt a rage building inside her. How could this be happening? How could the world be so cruel, so indifferent? When they arrived home, John was waiting outside her house. John was Peter's younger brother, a quiet man who lived alone and rarely spoke to anyone. He shifted uncomfortably as Faith approached. I heard, he said simply, about Divine, about the hospital. Faith said nothing, too exhausted for polite conversation. I want to help, John continued, his voice rough with emotion. I know my brother refused you. I know everyone refused you. And I'm ashamed. I stood by and did nothing while you suffered. He pulled out a small cloth bag, pressing it into Faith's hands. It's not much, all my savings, but maybe it helps with the medicine. Faith opened the bag and saw coins and a few crumpled bills. It wasn't enough for the hospital, but it was enough for the prescribed medications, enough to give Divine a fighting chance. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at John. Why? Why are you doing this? Because it's right, he said simply, and because I've been a coward long enough. Your daughter is innocent. She deserves to live. The medications helped, but only temporarily. Divine's fever would break for a few hours, giving Faith hope, only to return with renewed vengeance. Days blurred into nights. Faith stopped sleeping, too terrified to close her eyes in case Divine stopped breathing. She fed her daughter water drop by drop, crushed herbs that old women in the village had recommended, sang lullabies until her voice grew hoarse. Amelia visited daily, bringing food and encouragement. John checked on them regularly, his presence a quiet reassurance, but others kept their distance. The village had made its judgment, and Faith was on the wrong side of it. Ruth spread stories about Faith's stubbornness, her refusal to accept her situation. Irene told anyone who would listen that the illness was divine punishment. Peter avoided making eye contact whenever he saw Faith. Mr. Thomas acted as if she didn't exist, and through it all, Divine grew weaker. One evening, as Faith sat beside her daughter, Divine opened her eyes, those beautiful eyes that had once sparkled with curiosity and laughter. "Mama," she whispered, "don't be sad." "I'm not sad, my love," Faith lied, stroking her daughter's hair. "You're going to get better." "If I don't." Divine's voice was so weak Faith had to lean close to hear. "Promise me you won't be angry. Not at God, not at the neighbours. Promise me." "Divine, don't talk like that. Promise me, Mama." Faith closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I promise." Divine smiled, a small, tired smile. "I love you, Mama. You're the strongest person I know." Then her eyes fluttered closed, and her breathing became shallow again. Faith sat there in the darkness, her daughter's words echoing in her mind. "The strongest person I know." But she didn't feel strong. She felt broken, defeated, ready to give up. The crisis came 3 days later. Divine stopped responding entirely. Her fever raged so high that Faith feared she was burning up from the inside. Her breathing became irregular, sometimes stopping for terrifying seconds before starting again. Faith ran outside, screaming for help. It was that moment, the moment described at the beginning, when she fell to her knees before her neighbours, begging, pleading, crying, and they turned away. Peter walked past without a word. Ruth closed her door. Others simply pretended not to hear. Faith returned to Divine, her heart shattering. This was it, the end. All her fighting, all her prayers, all her hope, it had come to this, her daughter dying, while the world looked away. She lay down beside Divine, pulling her close, deciding that if death was coming, at least they would face it together. That's when she heard the knock. Faith almost didn't answer. What was the point? But the knocking persisted, urgent and insistent. She opened the door to find a man she'd never seen before. He was middle-aged, with kind eyes and calloused hands. Behind him stood Amelia. "This is Daniel," Amelia said quickly. "He's a traditional healer from my village. He's helped people with cases like Divine's. Please, Faith, let him try." Faith wanted to refuse. She'd tried traditional healers already. But something in Daniel's eyes, a quiet confidence, a gentle certainty, made her hesitate. "Please," Amelia repeated. Faith stepped aside. Daniel entered and knelt beside Divine. He examined her carefully, checking her pulse, her eyes, her tongue. Then he reached into a bag and pulled out various herbs and roots. "The medicine she took from the clinic was good," he said, his voice calm, "but incomplete. The malaria has affected her in ways modern medicine sometimes misses. I can help, but it will require intensive care for the next 3 days. And there's risk." "What kind of risk?" Faith asked. "The treatment is strong. Her body is weak. There's a chance it could be too much for her. But without it, she will certainly die. The choice is yours." Faith looked down at Divine, at her daughter's pale, still face. Then she looked at Amelia, at John, who had appeared in the doorway, and finally at Daniel. "Do it," she said. The next 3 days were the longest of Faith's life. Daniel stayed in the house, preparing herbal concoctions that smelled bitter and earthy. He made Faith help him, teaching her how to administer the treatments, how to monitor Divine's responses. Amelia brought water and food. John stood guard outside, turning away the curious and the gossipers. On the first day, Divine's fever spiked even higher, and Faith nearly called it off. But Daniel remained calm, adjusting his treatments, whispering prayers over her daughter. On the second day, Divine had seizures that left Faith sobbing with terror. But Daniel never wavered, never showed doubt. On the third day, something changed. The fever broke. Divine's breathing steadied. Colour began to return to her cheeks. And then, as the sun rose on the fourth day, Divine opened her eyes. "Mama?" she whispered. Faith couldn't speak. She could only hold her daughter and weep. Word spread quickly through the village. Divine had recovered. Faith's daughter, who everyone had written off as dead, was alive. The reaction was complicated. Some people, like John, were genuinely happy. Others, like Ruth and Peter, seemed almost disappointed, as if Divine's recovery somehow proved them wrong. Irene claimed she'd been praying for the girl all along, conveniently forgetting her earlier judgments. Mr. Thomas came to visit, offering belated assistance that Faith politely declined. She saw through his gesture he was afraid of looking bad now that Divine had survived without his help. But Faith found she wasn't angry. Divine's words had stayed with her. Promise me you won't be angry. And somehow, through the ordeal, Faith had discovered something about herself. She was stronger than she'd ever imagined. Not because she'd saved Divine alone, she hadn't. Amelia, John and Daniel had helped, but she'd kept fighting when everyone else had given up. She'd refused to let her daughter go quietly into death. That was strength. That was love. And no one could take it from her. A month later, Divine was back in school, thinner but healthy. Her laughter returning like a bird finding its voice after winter. Faith had managed to pay John back and had started saving again. Amelia visited often, their friendship renewed and deeper than before. Daniel had returned to his village, but had left behind knowledge about the herbs that had saved Divine, teaching Faith how to recognize and prepare them. One evening, as Faith cooked dinner, Divine looked up from her homework. "Mama, I've been thinking." "About what, my love?" "When I become a doctor, I want to help people who have no one else to help them. Like Daniel helped me. Like Amelia and John helped us." Faith smiled, her heart full. "That's a beautiful dream." "And maybe," Divine continued, "I can teach people to help each other, so that no one has to feel as alone as you felt." Faith put down the pot she'd been stirring and knelt beside her daughter. "You know what makes you special, Divine? You almost died, and instead of being angry at the people who turned their backs on us, you want to help others. That takes a bigger heart than I have." "You have the biggest heart, Mama," Divine said seriously. "You never gave up on me, even when everyone else did." They sat together in the fading light, mother and daughter, survivors of a battle that had nearly destroyed them. Outside, the village continued its rhythms, people talking, children playing, life moving forward. Faith thought about the neighbours under the tree, the closed doors, the turned backs. She thought about Irene's poisonous words and Mr. Thomas's indifference. She could be bitter. She could hold on to the anger and hurt, but she chose not to. Because Divine was alive, because kindness had come from unexpected places, because she had learned that she didn't need everyone's help to survive, just the help of a few good people who cared. And she had learned that sometimes the strength you need is already inside you, waiting for a crisis to bring it out. The scars would remain. Faith would never forget the feeling of kneeling before her neighbours, begging for help that never came. But the scars would also remind her of what she'd overcome, of the love that had saved her daughter, of the community she'd built from the ashes of the one that had failed her. In the end, that was the real story. Not just about neighbours who turned away, but about a mother who refused to turn away from hope, about a daughter who chose forgiveness over bitterness, about strangers who became family when family became strangers. Divine would go on to become a doctor many years later. She would return to the village and build a small clinic, treating patients regardless of their ability to pay. She would tell everyone who asked that her mother had taught her the most important lesson in medicine, that healing isn't just about curing disease, but about being present for people when they need you most. And Faith would smile whenever she heard Divine say this, remembering those dark days when the world had turned its back and she had learned that sometimes when everyone else closes their doors, you have to become your own door, standing firm, holding strong, refusing to let the darkness in. That was what it meant to be a mother. That was what it meant to love. And that, ultimately, was what it meant to survive. The neighbours who had closed their doors that day would carry their own burdens of guilt and regret. Some, like John, would find redemption through changed actions. Others would justify their choices until they believed their own excuses. But their stories were theirs to tell. This was Faith's story, and it ended not with bitterness, but with a mother and daughter together, alive and stronger for having survived the fire. When the world turns its back on you, true strength is found, not in waiting for others to help, but in refusing to give up. And true humanity is shown not by those who watch from the sidelines, but by those who step forward when everyone else walks away. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next powerful story. We bring you real-life stories of struggle, survival, and triumph that will inspire you, move you, and remind you of the strength within you. Coming up next, we have another incredible story that will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss it. Like this video, drop a comment below and tell us what moment in Faith's story resonated with you the most. Have you or someone you know faced a situation where neighbours or community turned their backs when help was needed most? Share your thoughts. We read every single comment. Remember, you are stronger than you know, and your story matters. See you in the next video. God bless you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.